when the UFC was striving to become as mainstream as it possibly could, think, 2010 plus, even before that, really, it's post 2005 Ultimate Fighter, but, around that time, they were trying to say, listen, MMA is for everybody. It's for old, young, black, white, rich, poor, male, female, you name it. They, in fact, used to celebrate, Pride Month. They had a shirt that had the colors of the Pride flag and the letters that said, "We are all fighters." Yeah, we are all fighters. That was a shirt you could buy at the UFC store. They leaned into it at that time, and which, by the way, makes sense because obviously there are, there's a big portion of the fighting base, especially among the women, that are openly gay. But putting that aside, the point I'm trying to make is, as they were striving to have a big tent approach, it worked. It worked. It convinced all of these people. You could convince skeptics they were wrong about MMA, that it was for everyone. But at some point they hit I think in their minds anyway, they hit a saturation point. They just said, fuck it. And they went the other way. And now they're not explicitly saying this, but through their actions, they're basically saying, listen, we don't want some of you anymore. We just don't want you anymore.
That rubbed off on Rogan, the whole apparatus? Because I obviously know you've been on Rogan, right? If I'm not mistaken, like way back in the day.
2020, October 2020. Mm-hmm.
Oh, okay. So that's actually not that long ago, 5 years ago. And that was right when Rogan really started to fall off, if I dare say myself. You know what I mean? After the pandemic, when he leaned into like anti-vaxxing, I was like, Jesus Christ, it's hard to just grit my teeth and listen to the fun bits now. You know what I mean? I could listen to him, have some cringe takes, but that was like a fucking bridge too far for me and a lot of people, I think. But do you think that him being steeped in this MMA world, because I think some people underestimate it, right? How critical the MMA world and culture is to Joe Rogan's worldview, to his identity. This man identifies as a fighter. He's a black belt in jiu-jitsu. He's a black belt in taekwondo. He knows his shit. When you listen to him talk about MMA, I remember when he rolled out the Joe Rogan MMA podcast and he would just go for like an hour and a half, 2 hours by himself. And I was like, you know what, Joe Rogan, you like really do know about MMA. You care about it. Do you think that the culture of that rubbed off on him because he was like, oh, fuck, I'm going to lose my connection to this thing I really love if I don't dabble in the MAGA world, because that's clearly where MMA is going?
Man, it's a tough question to answer. I have thought about this quite a bit. I went back and I looked. He had Stefan, I can't remember, I always pronounce his last name wrong, Stefan Molyneux. He had him on twice during the Obama years. Like, part of me just believes he's always been inclined in this direction, and that as wealth and power accumulated and the vibe switched, kind of he let that go in the direction that the flow of that naturally took him. There's a part of that. Also, like, I'm not exactly sure. Don't get me wrong, like, obviously played a role, but I'm not really sure how much MMA has radicalized young men versus the broader culture radicalized young men, and as a consequence that bled out into MMA. It was the recipient of that audience rather than turning that audience from something they were to something that they weren't. I've had a hard time trying to figure that out. I don't really know.
No, I think that's true. They put the bat signal out for the people who were like, oh, I'm MAGA. Like, I want to return to this racist country. Like, I believe in, traditional values in the sense that I want to subjugate women. I'm entitled to a wife, like that crew. But I'm wondering if that's why Joe Rogan decided, like, you know what, fuck it. Like, I will get in this bed, because to me, he was the guy that made it so that the Andrew Schultzes of the world, so that the Theo Vons of the world, so that all of his fucking rugrats, that, all of his goons, they just say whatever the fuck he says, right? So that's why Tony Hinchcliffe was like, I'm going to go, talk at the RNC or whatever the hell he did. You know what I mean?
Right. I'm not entirely sure. I think what I would say is, like, here's what the UFC is doing. I think Rogan's case is related, but different, substantively different. The UFC is basically making a gamble. And their gamble is, we can tell a big part of the audience, at least a substantive part of the audience that we once had, to go fuck themselves. We don't need you anymore. But what we will be is we'll be a lifestyle brand, an identitarian brand along these causes where, yeah, we might be making a long-term trade-off with how big the audience can be, but we're making a much more secure bet with how loyal who remains will ultimately be. Now, I do think that's a gamble. Like, I mean, I just cannot recall a sports brand, at least in the West, making such a hardcore pivot along ideological lines in a way ever in my life in the English-speaking world. I just don't recall it ever happening that way.
What about when the NFL went woke?
I know. It's like, dude, understand, for folks who don't watch UFC, and I understand, like, much of your audience, I suspect, probably will not. But when Trump walks out now, it's not every event, obviously, but when he does walk out, he now walks out to the fucking Undertaker song, the Kid Rock Metallica cover, American Badass, and the audience roars. And here's the best way to understand the audience change. I was there in New York City in the first, and Trump won, when Jorge Masvidal fought Nate Diaz in Madison Square Garden. This was for the inaugural.
That was a fucking. I watched that on pay-per-view.
Okay, I was there that night, and when Trump walked out, he got some cheers, he got some boos. The boos were quite audible, but let's be charitable and say it was a mix. Then he goes back, UFC 309. This was just this past November, so he's won the election, but he hasn't taken office yet. And he walks out, and it is a fucking rapturous reception, a huge reception. Yeah. And the people think the argument is, oh, all the fans changed their minds. No, they got filtered out and then replaced with this homogeneity, which has created a monoculture inside of MMA, which if they get their way in boxing, they'll do the same there.
Scary.
Yeah, fucking crazy. One last thing from me. I know we want to be respectful of your time, but UFC White House, is it happening? Are they going to do a fight at the UFC White House?
The answer is probably yes.
Oh, that's not the. I mean, honestly, as a commentator, sure. As an American patriot, somebody who doesn't want to see this country disintegrate into more of a corporate oligarchy fascist takeover, I do say, oh,
yeah, it's not what I would prefer either. I think it's I don't wish to see it. However, here's what I would say. Just the secure. I mean, it's not just that they want to have fights on the lawn, which you're just asking from a logistical perspective. Is such a thing possible? Yes, it is possible. There is an adequate amount of space in order to accomplish this goal. But they actually, with the South Lawn, and then you could potentially even use the ellipses, which is beyond the. I live in DC. It's beyond the scope. It's past what's E Street, I think, onto Constitution. Yeah, you could do it, but they want to sell like more than 20,000 tickets to it. That creates a huge problem that I don't know from a security standpoint how easily solvable that is. Also, here's just the thing that I come back to. It's like, where the fuck we've been in office this guy's been in office 6 months, and it's just been a path of destruction. What is it going to look like in another year? I mean, how palatable will this be to the public? I suspect that the networks are going to be like, they're not going to want to turn down the opportunity to have a brand that they broadcast on the White House lawn in such a historic way.
We're going to talk about it.
But yeah, I know I'm not going to go to the event, but I'm sure I'll be covering it in one capacity or another. But I would say in general, yes, the answer is more likely than not it happens. But does it happen with an audience? That part I'm unclear about.
It sounds like something that like China would make up to like make fun of America. Like they're going to have a fucking fist fight on the White House lawn and 20 million people are going to watch, It's just also crazy that's reality.
Like, dude, I served in the American military. I was a U.S. Marine, and I love July 4th as much as the next guy. What the fuck does this have to do with July 4th? This has nothing to cage fights on the White House lawn. You could put them down at the formerly the Verizon Center, now the Capital One Arena. You can sell the tickets. Trump can go to it. That's fine. Why are we doing this in remembrance of our departure from our relationship to the British? It doesn't, like, none of it makes any
poetic
sense.
Actually, we got rid of an old crown and now we're ushering in a new corporate crown. That's America now.
I did want to ask a little bit about the impact you've seen that your more political conversations have had in the MMA space. Zach was mentioning that you got Kyle Kulinski on the show. That's super cool. I'm gonna have to check that out ASAP after this conversation. But I was just wondering, what kind of response to that you got? Because Kyle Kulinski went on Joe Rogan's show a couple of times. The most recent time, I remember being kind of bummed out because Joe Rogan's audience had really turned toxic, and a lot of the comments were people making fun of Kyle, even though I thought he did a great job and said a lot of sensible stuff. It was a bunch of people bitching and moaning, like, who's this? Why are you having on this woke SJW? And I was like, Jesus Christ, Rogan's audience is cooked. So when you have a guy like Kyle on, or when you put out a progressive take, do you get any kind of backlash that you have to sort of just ignore or put on the blinders to?
Yeah, no, brother, it's the Gatling gun every day. I mean, it's potent. But it's kind of interesting, right? I mean, I'd say a couple things to that. It's like, number one, what is the value of the truth if you're just not allowed to speak it? I mean, what good is the truth holstered? It is nothing. It has no utility, really. So for me, I just don't see a value. I mean, I guess there can be some kind of argument for like your mental health and online abuse spaces to be, protected. But short of that, I don't really know what the argument would be to holster some of these ideas. Yes, I mean, it's a range of different responses, right? Not all of it negative, in fact. You can get the kinds that are like, Trump's support is probably going to be locked in somewhere between 20 and 30%. There's a bunch of those kinds of people who would represent that part of the electorate in MMA. And, anytime I give any kind of take that's like, I think poor kids should get lunch at school, it's like, fuck this guy. He's the, he's a libtard, whatever you want to say. You get a lot of that. That's a part of it. You get a lot of just general resistance, snarkiness. I am somewhat shielded by the fact that I cannot tell you how many emails I've gotten. People like, yo, listen, man, I fucking hate your political takes, but I really love the breakdown of this fight, blah, 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 blah. So I get somewhat shielded by that. However,
the game recognized game comment,
It's like, yes, I do agree that Ilya Toporia's got a great left hand, but also fuck you for, blah, blah. So I get a little bit of that.
You don't seem condescending at all either, or like patronizing. At least in this conversation,
I'm friendly to y'all. I'll be condescending as shit to certain people. I mean, I'll dunk on a motherfucker fast if it duty calls.
Fair enough. I just meant in your videos where you're talking about politics. Like, I doubt you're coming at it from like a moralizing tone necessarily. But
I have changed. There I don't do it as much. In part because it just kills me how much I know some of these. In my audience, just demographically is mostly going to be young men. Somewhere 25, 34, 49, somewhere in there. How reachable they are, and yet I can't. It's like you have to. I cannot tell you how many emails I've gotten from people and DMs and like in-person anecdotes being like, when I first heard you started speaking about this, I really hated you. I was into Ben Shapiro and blah, blah, blah. And then as their life changed and they got a little bit older and they kind of kept hearing the drumbeat of somebody being like, I love my wife and I like being a family guy and hanging out with my daughter is the greatest joy of my entire maybe adult life, and simple joys are effective, and like I live a certain kind of life, and I try to live by certain values that they sort of associate with almost traditional conservatism. And then when they see me espousing it and they see me trying to bring humanity into certain points of view, I have gotten testimonial after testimonial from guys that not when they're 22, but by the time they're MMA fan at 32 and life's in a different position, they have reconsidered an enormous amount, and they have begun to then agree with some of these takes where I'm building around like, hey, let's make sure we have good public schools. Let's make sure we have good public infrastructure. Let's make sure we take care of people like that. I have definitely been able to convince people, not instantly, but over the course of time.
Look out the door if you hear an ambulance. The Vanguard will be there, sir. The Vanguard will be there, sir. The Vanguard